But I think the primary culprit posing such a challenge for us is that we really don't see ourselves as part of nature.
Hey folks, welcome to the first episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. I have long admired today's guest, and I'm incredibly grateful that he took the time to chat. Vincent Stanley is the Director of Philosophy at Patagonia, having worked there since the very start of the company, holding various roles in sales and marketing, and over the last decade, operating as the Director of Philosophy. He's informally known as the Chief Storyteller of the iconic outdoor company. The occasion for our conversation is the publication of Vincent's latest book with Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard, The Future of the Responsible Company, which is an absolute must-read. We start out discussing Vincent's connection with nature and then dig a bit deeper on some of the key topics in the book, like the importance of community and having a sense of place, how we can connect industry leaders with nature, and changing the pace and language of business. Massive thanks to Stephanie and Jin from Vincent's team and Patagonia for making this happen, and to Vincent for not just taking the time to chat, but being an incredible leader and example for the business world. Without further delay, here's the very first episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with Vincent Stanley, Director of Philosophy at Patagonia. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, we have Vincent Stanley, Patagonia's Director of Philosophy and a resident fellow at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you for having me.
So first off, I want to congratulate you on the publication of the new book, The Future of the Responsible Company, which is a follow-up to the beloved Responsible Company, which is also written with Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard. So one of the things that I found most enjoyable in the book, sort of a thread that appears in the different chapters, is the comparisons between you and Yvon, especially in the sort of outdoor and adventure categories. It sort of notes how you were the one back in the office when Patagonia's Ventura staff would famously, head out when the waves were good and you were answering the phone. So just to give you your due, how would you describe your relationship with nature and wild spaces?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly changed over time, and it's changed a lot because of my work at Patagonia. So I was raised in the city and did not spend a lot of time outside. I was vocationally a writer from the time I was very young. So I'm Yvon's nephew. So I was 6 or 7 years old and would see him hammering pitons in my grandparents' backyard. And I loved that business from the time I was a kid. I really admired it, but it was not something I could see myself in relation to until I went to work for the company. And then I think I mentioned in the book that there was a certain point where I was the last person in the office, myself and a 55-year-old bookkeeper with a wonderful woman with a beehive hairdo, and we were the last people there. I would answer the phones, take the dealer orders, and that's basically how I got to be sales manager. They said, you're the only one interacting with the customer, so you're sales manager. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, we don't know either. You'll figure it out. But working at Chouinard Equipment and then at Patagonia, of course, I got invited to go skiing for the first time and spend some time in the mountains. So over time, I developed a really deep love of being in the mountains and also sea kayaking along the coast of Maine. So I was brought into the fold, I think, by my colleagues. But I never became an adventurer. So nothing exciting.
So in the book, you write, humans are part of nature, and if we had no experience in its wild state, we would lose our sense of human scale. When we look at the reasons that we might be experiencing the climate and biodiversity crisis, have we lost that connection to nature? And that's why we're not acting as quickly as we could be on this climate and biodiversity crisis?
It could be. I think there's a vestigial connection. I think every kid still has a connection when they're going outside and they're running around and they're looking at bugs, and they have a different relationship to animals than grown-ups do. But I think the primary culprit posing such a challenge for us is that we really don't see ourselves as part of nature. And this is not new. This has been going on for a while as we developed our industrial systems over the last 200 or 300 years. We've gained the illusion that we are somehow apart from nature and that we can control it or keep it at bay. And I think this separation is really critical to our loss of understanding of ourselves as a part of an ecosystem that includes the forest, it includes the watershed where we live, it includes all of the gifts of nature that we rely on in order to live a life in ordinary civilization.
And do you think it would change things if some sort of adventurer, maybe someone on the Patagonia athlete roster, took a CEO of a big oil giant out to catch some waves or out into the forest? Do you think that connection is missing at the leadership of industry?
Well, we know it does make a difference because we know that the Walmart leadership in 2007 went on a river trip, and very remote, and went through all the experiences, those of us who've been on river trips who are not CEOs or CFOs of Walmart. And it made a difference that when they came back, they started to work on a sustainability policy. Then over the last 15 or 16 years, they've advanced and retreated quite a bit. But it's amazing to me that this still is part of the DNA at Walmart, because Walmart has special challenges. When your business model is nobody can be cheaper, it is very difficult to reduce your environmental impact, and when you're that size. But I do know that makes a difference. When you get away from the road, you just get a mile from the road, and your sense of yourself in relation to nature comes alive, and you feel both the awe of being in the presence of something bigger than yourself, and also a sense of self-reliance. You're much more vulnerable, and at the same time, you're relying on your own resources in order to live in nature. But I think it's not the only thing. It was interesting. The first film we made at Patagonia, Damnation, I remember working with the producers on that and seeing it for the first time in a movie theater and thinking, oh my God, they have really captured the feeling of what it's like to be alive on a river. And they had captured it without actually somebody being there. So I think that there are other ways. There are other ways in besides being out in the wild. But being out in the wild is an awfully palpable, strong way to come to a realization that we're part of something bigger, that we have to defend it. Much of what we're doing in business, much of what we're doing as consumers is leading to the thinning and the destruction of that wildlife.
Following on from that, you cite the transcendentalists in the book, how they believe that we can learn directly from nature about who we are and how we live. What have you learned from nature about how to live, but also how to operate in the business world?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know. I think the only thing I've taken from nature in terms of dealing with business is a reminder, keeping it real or keeping it honest in some way. Nature doesn't mess around with lying. One of the things in business is if you want to make environmental or social improvements, and if you want to innovate, if you want to create better products, you have to keep close the sense of reality that nature gives you. So I think that would be the main thing. Mostly, I think in my working life, being in the natural world revived me personally, or helped me not burn out, reminded me of what was important, etc.
Another idea that I saw sprinkled throughout the book is the importance of being local. So you talk about rural economies, participating community, the value of local knowledge. I know Patagonia grantees, part of the funding actually goes through the stores, so they know what's going to be directly needed in their communities and the nonprofits that are doing good work. And you talk about rural economies being something to participate in, not just visit. So, local knowledge is crucial in nature. So when we think about multinational global organizations, even Patagonia that exists all over the world, How do we maintain that balance between having these efficiencies that come from being a global organization, but also an organization that recognizes their roots, even if there's multiple roots through the retail footprint? Like, can you talk a little bit about that value of being connected locally?
There have been lots of benefits to globalization, including our ability to have this conversation over Zoom and to have a podcast. But one of the things it's weakened, or it's taken the place of, local business and local agriculture, local a sense of place. And I think that that's something, there's plenty of room to strengthen that, to bring that back. There's no reason to accept this, the way we live right now, as the way we're going to be living 10 years or 20 years from now. And we know it isn't going to be that way because of the pressures that we're facing now. But I think a revival of a sense of local is really important for several reasons. One, it's important for democracy because it's a lot easier for you to have a conversation with someone you don't agree with across a table than it is on the internet. Second, it's really important for the environment because in order to save a place, you have to care about it. And so if you have a lively sense of place in your community and everybody knows where you're getting your water, everybody knows the services that the forest is providing, that there's a connection between rural activities or rural places in your region and the city that also functions economically. I think that represents an important part of our future, a necessary part of our future.
And so you mentioned that you grew up as a writer, and one of my favorite lines in your book is that one that we touched on earlier: nature was something you drove to. And I think over the last decade, we've seen a reemergence of ideas like Aldo Leopold's land ethic and Wendell Berry, both in agriculture, but I think even more generally in society. Like, when you talk about localism, like, does an idea like Leopold's land ethic make it more directly relevant, like this connection to nature, to those who maybe aren't surfers, climbers, adventurers, but can kind of take up this cause to responsibility to nature when they know where their local water comes from, when they know where their food's grown? How important is that and that land ethic when it comes to that connection with nature and being responsible for nature?
I think it's very important. And if you go back to sort of what's behind the land ethic, there's this wonderful quote from Leopold that a thing is right when it tends to support the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. And there again, when he talks about biotic community, he means human beings and human communities are a part of that. And if you actually consider that, you know that everything we do in economic life tends to undermine the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. So I think it's a great North Star for us to look at what we do for a living, how we live in the place we live, and say, okay, what can we do to actually favor the integrity, stability, and beauty of the natural world of which we're a part? That's just an absolutely incredible connection. I think when I talk to people about this who don't have a strong relationship to nature, they're not going outside on the weekend or going for a bike ride every day along the coast. I think that it's an easy concept to grasp.
On that idea of helping people grasp these concepts and helping form that connection as a means to that responsibility, I remembered probably about 9-10 years ago or so, I was living in New York City. I went to an event at the Patagonia store in Soho, actually with the folks at Stone Barns when they released the book Letters to a Young Farmer.
That was a great event.
It was fantastic. It was absolutely packed. People were sitting on the floor. It was amazing. And, honestly, like, I think that was a big turning point in my interest in connection with nature, of seeing it beyond just surfing, snowboarding, hiking. So when you think about your time in sales and marketing at Patagonia, how do you think about Patagonia's marketing, and what does responsible marketing look like? Yes, you have the sales of the product, but you created a generation of people who care about the environment. What does responsible marketing look like to you?
Well, that was an example. I was there that night, and we had 500 people there, I think. I was terrified that the fire marshal would show up.
It was amazing.
And it was letters from a young farmer. I mean, it was not exactly a New York-centric topic. So what I liked about that was that it wasn't marketing in some fashion. It was a community event that Patagonia was making possible. And I think that, going back to, yes, Patagonia is a global company in the sense that we operate in we source from a number of countries and we operate in a number of countries, but in every place we operate in, particularly where we're selling, we try to be local. And it's really important for us to connect to the sport communities, the local sport communities and the local environmental community, and to make possible these evenings like you went to that really open up everybody to the idea, oh, this is a great idea and there are other people interested in it there, and there are activities going on that I can see myself as a part of, or I can see myself as an ally. So that's important for us. And it's interesting to me, for a while the stores were not doing so well in the 2000s, and we had gone away from community events. And once we reinstated those and reinstated that commitment to the local communities, the stores started to do well again. And I think it was hard with COVID because all of that was shut down for 3 years. But it's really important. Marketing at its basis is letting people know what you have, making it attractive in some way, but it doesn't really require manipulation. It doesn't really require a kind of abstracted or transactional relationship to the customers. I think we've done well because we've reached out to the customers as fellow human beings rather than potential buyers, repeat buyers.
I love that. And it's really interesting, Patagonia, in that respect, setting a standard in the retail environment, being also a community space. And there's really so many great stories in the book about really deep change that Patagonia has undergone. The Footprint Chronicles, which I know you were a massive part of, and the switch to organic cotton after the store in Boston realized that people were getting sick because of the formaldehyde. The business world today, I think, is driven by so much short-term thinking. And yet, you look at nature, it operates much more slowly. Do you think it's possible to shift the time horizon of business in the sort of current capitalism, market-driven economy we have?
Yes, I don't think it would be entirely voluntary, but I don't think short-termism works for business any more than it does for society or for nature. Because if you're really concentrating on quarterly returns, it's very difficult to concentrate on the long-term health of your business. And I think we see all kinds of examples. It puts everybody in kind of a fear mode. Oh my God, I've got to goose up the profits on the quarterly return, and that's essential because my product is basically my stock price. And when you do that, I think you start to harm the long-term interest of business. If you look at the long-term interest of a business and the long-term interest of nature, or the long-term interest of human communities, they can line up, but they can't line up when it's all for short-term gain. But this is only a 50-year-old definition of business that came out of Milton Friedman and the idea of shareholder primacy. Basically, he had argued it's too squishy and it's too confusing to argue for the good of a business except by its stock price and except by the number that comes to the bottom line. And I think that after 50 or 60 years of that, we've all discovered the limitations of it. You just can't define value by the price that people will pay for your products.
So true. And part of that, I think, too, is this idea of language. So you mentioned in the book, we know instinctively that we are not superior to nature, but our language says otherwise. We refer to nature as resources, as if it were at our disposal. This reminded me of a few different places I've heard similar ideas of this. And it's one of my actual passion points because I think the language of business drives so much of the culture of business, and it changes the way we think about things. So when we think about this sort of current extractive tide of many businesses, how important do you think language, especially as a writer, is to changing the culture of business and shifting away from this sort of short-term, very aggressive form of capitalism?
Well, yeah, I have a prejudice that language is important for everything. And what I see it's interesting. I have a group of students I meet with at Yale every month, and what we're talking about are what will be the major issues of their working careers. These are graduate students in the environmental and the divinity and the business schools. And what I see I often see is they're kind of grappling with the language that they've all been taught to use that's highly abstracted, cliched, or kind of glossed over, so you don't really have to think. If you go back and you read someone like Thoreau, or you read someone like Emerson, or you read any good fiction, what you see is that the language is really held to account. It actually has to convey more meaning than it fogs. And in business, the cliches are legion, but it's also the cliches are legion in everything else, in government and in academia as well. So I think it'd be really wonderful if we all start to move away from that.
One, I think, example of language more in the positive sense is a newer area of the business, Patagonia Provisions, that's been around. I say newer only in the context of it's Patagonia's 50th anniversary, and Provisions is much newer. But you mentioned the book that for Provisions, each new product they introduce must solve a problem, whether it's from land or sea, in the food supply, as well as be nutritious and superior quality. So you work with students, you work with a lot of business leaders. When we look at ambitious goals like that, how do we get more companies to set out those sort of goals where every new product, every new initiative is actually solving a problem rather than just tiny marginal gains on things that don't really matter?
Well, I would also say that for Patagonia as an apparel company, that we're not there. Very few of our products would be solving a problem. But I think what Provisions has done for us is to provide a North Star to say, okay, this is the direction we should be going in. And I would argue that for business as a whole, especially small and medium-sized businesses, saying this is possible. And it creates a great business model because you're not following whoever you regard as the leader, which is usually people see the leader as the company that's 20% bigger than they are. You're solving environmental and social problems. You're actually earning your social license by putting this at the heart of your business model. And then I think at the very least, what all companies should be doing, including ours and including publicly traded companies, of which there are only 3,700 in the United States, is that we're responsible for cleaning up after ourselves. And that's certainly something anybody who wants to be responsible in business has to really do. So the big thing is to offer products and services that we need and that solve problems, but then the minimum is to clean up our act.
As a final question, I want to go through one more line in the book. Acting on behalf of our threatened planet is both a condition and an expression of our freedom, of what makes us human. So in your opinion, will business help us get there? Will it be a driver of that action, or will it be an obstacle?
Well, I think it will be all three. When I go back to that quote, there's a quote we use at the very start of the book from Heisler leader Gerald Amos. It says that the most important right we have is the right to be responsible. And I like the way that's phrased. It's not phrased as the most important obligation we have. It's the most important right. And it's a sense of agency that if we're living creatures and we're responding to the world around us, we're going to act in such a way that starts to preserve that integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. I think that having that sense of agency is much more important, for instance, than being optimistic. Because you can be optimistic and say, well, everything's going to be okay. But having a sense of agency means you have a role in that. You can see yourself as part of the effort to bring about more in the world that you want to see present.
That is a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much, Vincent, for taking the time to chat today. The book is amazing, and I'm definitely going to encourage everyone who's listening to go and check it out because it's a fantastic read. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks.